Well, welcome everyone. It's so wonderful to see such a nice group here to hear this presentation by Kathy Brooks called A Patchwork of Blessings. Kathy, as many of you know, is a junior kindergarten teacher here at Grace, and as you can imagine by looking around this room, she brings a lot of creativity to everything that she does. Kathy and I first got to know each other 28 years ago at a different church, and we taught a 3-year-old Sunday school class together, and it was just great because Kathy had a lot of expertise with puppetry that she brought to our class, and just a delightful person, as I know most of you know firsthand. Today, I just want to share a little bit of background about Kathy. She's been quilting for 34 years. She doesn't have an exact number, but she estimates she's made over 400 quilts, and we have about 62 of them in this room. She has written 2 quilting books, which are on this table. She has appeared in a number of quilting magazines. Articles have been written about her, and she has written articles about quilting. She has won international quilting awards, and this morning she's going to share with us her work and also how that has been woven in with her journey of faith. So thank you so much for being here, and thank you, Kathy.
Okay, it's on. Perfect. As I look out at the crowd gathered here, I am both honored and fearful to stand before you telling my story. It is a risk to reveal my humanness in a place where I both work and live. It is human nature to opt for privacy and professionalism, but today I believe God has called me to reveal His power in my weakness. And for me, it is sheer joy and familiar comfort to tell my story with needlework. I have been stitching since I was a little girl. Growing up as a Scandinavian German Lutheran in Minnesota, you know I come from some pretty stubborn roots. I prefer to use the word determined. We had 6 children in our family and always a couple of unruly foster kids, so quiet activities were encouraged. My mother, who is here by the way, in the hat over here, was way too busy making hot dish to spend time crafting, so I just figured things out on my own. I taught myself to knit, embroider, and sew. I perfected my skills in 4-H, and I competed and often won various competitions. So I can't resist showing one of my earliest almost success stories. While I was in high school, I spent 2 years knitting this dress, which I've recently shared with the moths. I had to do a little stitching last night. And I competed against adult women in the Make It Yourself with Wool competition, and I took 2nd place in the state of Illinois. And though it has been nearly 40 years, if you ask my father, who is also here, he will tell you I was robbed and I should have won. Oh, and by the way, I wore this dress as a part of the junior Miss pageant. It was part of my talent. I wore it and then I played my saxophone. It was really impressive, I'm sure. I attended college at the University of Illinois in Champaign, and I received degrees in early childhood education and elementary education. And there I met the love of my life, Rich Brooks. And we married as soon as I graduated. Just a few months into our marriage, I began my first quilt, and here it is. It's a log cabin quilt, and it took me 16 years to finish it. And the final motivation to finish it was discovering a mouse had crawled into the batting and died.
It's actually 4 times this size.
I taught school for a bit, 4th grade at Lincoln School in River Forest, and the next couple of decades were busy and wonderful raising our 3 kids. Travis, back there on the camera, Jordan, who lives in New York, and Haley up here in the front. And we were busy buying our first house and our second and our third. Rich and I had a wonderful marriage. He had his own business with a flexible schedule, and he worked out of the house. He was present for every big and small event in our children's lives. Our spacious home was a frequent gathering place for family and friends. I hooked this rug, which hung on the wall in an inconspicuous location. Do not confuse hospitality with endurance. We went to church every Sunday and participated in meaningful ways. We did a lot and had a lot. I loved our lives, except maybe they were a little too busy. I quilted a lot. I made dozens of quilts, entered competitions, won some competitions, wrote patterns and magazine articles and 2 books. I frequently spoke at quilt guilds and taught workshops far and wide, from Chicago to Norway. I even appeared on live television telling Alison Rosati about my big win in a major national quilt competition while Warner Saunders was busy trying to find Waldo in my patchwork. And this is it. You can find Waldo later if you would like.
Oh my goodness.
I call this quilt Edwiniasa, which means my skill is exhausted. At the time I started this quilt, we had just moved into our last house and we were renovating it. And there was one room that was done and clean, and it was my studio, which was a tiny, tiny room. But I would run up there every chance I had just to calm myself. Miniature quilts were a specialty of mine, and many of these on the tables were made during those years. I liked things in order. I am a perfectionist. One day, as I was attempting to chase my children around the cross-country course, my left leg was having trouble keeping up. By the next day, my entire left side was limp. I was unable to walk, the left side of my body nearly useless. I was 42 years old. I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and life changed forever. With a non-functioning hand, a future of quilting was uncertain. I knew without a doubt if quilting was over, God had a new plan for me, and it would be wonderful. Over time, I regained a lot of my stitching abilities, and I made this quilt, which I just started quilting this week. It's been unquilted all these years, about the experience. I'm going to read one thing off the back. I wrote on the back of this quilt is excerpts that I took from my journal during that time, and I just wanted to read you one part of it. She is like a tree planted by rivers of water, which brings forth its fruit in season, and whose leaf does not wither. And that's from Psalms. So you can flip to the other side. So the idea of this quilt was the tree growing in the middle, and then all of the things on the tree are symptoms or experiences that I had during that time of MS. I'll tell you one funny story and one cool story about that. If you look in the top left, you see there's kind of a red flower that's purple, and if you look at the purple part, it looks like a hand. Right. And so during the time that I couldn't walk and I was really debilitated, my son Jordan had a dance at school, and you know how all the parents always go to the dances and take the pictures, and since I wasn't mobile, he asked if we could have the pictures at our house. So all the kids came, and Rich had kind of settled me in this chair before I went, and I really couldn't move out of the chair. And one of the symptoms I had, we called it the claw, and it was like my left side would just seize up and just rise up, and I had no control over it, and it was just a claw. And we kind of laughed about it. Oh no, here comes the claw. But when all these kids were there, and then they were walking past me to line up, all of a sudden, there went my hand, and it was reaching out, and there was this girl in a red dress who didn't know me walking by, and she just saw my hand, like reaching for her dress. She was horrified. So that's kind of one of the stories. And really, all the things on there pretty much have a funny story. The other thing, if I could just show one more thing, at the very top, you see the hand. And the neatest thing happened to me in the hospital. The first night that I was in there, I thought that I couldn't turn over or anything like that, so how they put me was how I was. And I thought there was a nurse with her hand across my shoulders for the night. I thought, wow, who has that much time just to be in there and comfort someone? And I realized in the morning that it wasn't the nurse's hand. And that hand, the pressure of that hand remained on my back for months until I was able to walk and talk again. And it was really a beautiful thing. And that exact hand is actually my own father's hand, which I traced, and my earthly father's hand that I traced and put on there.
I like your needle.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
When they would do those blood gases, they hurt so bad that I would always pray for the needle angel, the one that got it in the first stick, is what that story was. So keeping up with life became more challenging, and I longed for simplicity, and I made this quilt. You thought you were going to get to sit down for a minute. I think it's sideways, actually. Yeah, there you go. It's from an old Quaker hymn that you're probably familiar with, "'Tis the gift to be simple, 'tis the gift to be free." As the years passed, I began to pray more earnestly for the desires of my heart. I asked God for a simpler life, and I asked God to make my husband the spiritual head of our household. Both of these requests were about as far-fetched as they could be. Then I made the mistake of telling God that I would accept however He chose to accomplish these two things. Looking back, I should have been more specific. Rich was feeling noticeably depressed, something he had never dealt with before. His parents were aging, and an old friend had just passed away. Sadness was understandable, and I was sure it was a passing thing. It wasn't. I began this quilt and prayed for my husband to cheer up. I will read it to you, but I have to look at it. Satisfy us in the morning with your unfailing love, that we may sing for joy and be glad all our days. And I have to tell you, this is maybe my favorite quilt that I've ever made. And I just drew the quilting pattern. I drew the letters, I cut them out freehand and appliqued them on, and then I just drew the quilting pattern on, and my name and the date and things are actually quilted into that. I frequently do that on my quilts. There's little messages to be had on the back and the quilting and all kinds of things. And I've done that for future generations so that they could have a little discovery that excites us quilters so much. Less than 6 months later, Rich had a nervous breakdown. As he sat in the psych ward in the hospital, barely able to communicate, I discovered he had not been functioning for quite some time. Rich owned his own insurance brokerage and, overwhelmed, had thrown unopened mail into a drawer for nearly a year. I called the lawyer. Rich remained in the hospital for a month, and I discovered our health insurance had lapsed. Within a week, I had to close Rich's business. Within a few days, 20 armed agents stormed our house with guns drawn and took every file, computer, and dollar we owned. For hours, the kids and I sat in the living room in our pajamas, traumatized by the chaos around us. Judgments cleaned out every bank account and our safety deposit box. The IRS came calling. We could no longer care for Rich's parents, and they were moved to a nursing home. The newspaper printed accounts of his misdeeds. Rich lost his ability to read, react, and function. He was fearful and had hallucinations. For 2 years, he sat in a chair, waiting for his prison sentence, 7.5 years. Our youngest daughter went to college. Rich went to prison. His parents died. I sold everything I could to keep the lights on until the house sold. It never did. I lacked the joy for creating quilts, so I pulled out my unfinished ones and worked away. This quilt, A Message to My Children, is one I finished when Rich was away. Let's see. There is a top.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Is that right?
There you go. Wow.
Kind of a fun thing about this quilt is obviously the message of love one another, but also near the bottom, it is my signature in letters. I don't know if you can see it going across, and the date and things. And also all my kids' names and Rich's name are stitched into this with letters. For instance, let me see, I'll come around. Sorry. They're not that obvious, and will I be able to find them? I think Travis's is up here somewhere. Let me see. Oh, well, here's Haley's right here. Hayley. It's right up here. So anyway, there's and down here is the signature part in River Forest, Illinois. So just kind of fun. And an interesting thing is the darker it is, the more you can see the love one another. But what I can tell you is that our family survived, thrived, intact. My husband served his time, and for 2.5 years I visited him every Monday, traveling a total of over 37,000 miles. The day he came home, July 6, 2009, was a celebration like no other. In the Brooks family, it is Freedom Day, and we celebrate it every year. And you may find it interesting that the very day that Rich came home from prison, Kendall Grigg, the principal of Grace at the time, called and offered me a teacher's aide job at Grace. And I didn't mention to her that my husband had just been released from prison. That was the beginning of my time at Grace. So while Rich was away, I hooked this rug and had it hanging over our bed when he came home. I'm really not much of a rug hooker. The two that you've seen are actually the only ones I've ever done, but I do enjoy doing it once in a while. In the end, we lost our house, and you may know that we live in the attic apartment here at Grace, although we prefer if you refer to it as the penthouse. The sounds of the choir, organ, and school children are the background noises of our lives. And in spite of everything, these are the blessings that abound. I know that God loves me dearly and provides for us in ways I could never imagine. I know that God can be glorified in lowly circumstances. I have a husband who loves me and whom I love, a man whose mind was miraculously healed in prison, a place where he had the time and desire to study the Bible for 4 to 6 hours a day. A man who has since completed a graduate program at Wheaton College in prison ministry. Our 3 children are compassionate, loving, and strong, and have moved into their young adult lives with purpose and determination. They are wise beyond their years. I have learned to forgive. About a year ago, I attended a funeral at which the same agents who had raided our house 7 years earlier filed into the pew in front of me. As they passed, a couple of them gave me that look of, where have I seen you before? But I had never forgotten their faces. When it came the time in the service to pass the peace, shaking their hands and offering the peace of Christ was one of the most difficult things I have ever done. and I have patience. Even when I think I can't do it anymore, I've learned that I can. We know who our friends are, and we take nothing for granted. We know how to find joy and humor in all circumstances. We know we can do without a lot of things we thought we needed. I have learned joy comes from the Lord, and I can be joyful even in crummy circumstances. We find joy in simple things. This is a Rudyard Kipling quote, and it hangs in my studio, and it's so true. It's so true. So often people comment to me that they never could have done what I have. And I believe that whatever our circumstances, God comes alongside and provides supernatural grace to keep us going. He renews our hopes. This is the last quilt that I just completed about a week and a half ago. And this is an Emily Dickinson quote, "Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul." And I worked on it a long time. It's another one of those that's everything about it is hand done, and it's also the stitching lines I just kind of free formed, and my name is also signed in there and the date and things. And I loved the quote. I didn't look up anything about the true meaning of what it is, but for me, it's hope. It comes from God, and it settles in us. It's in our soul. I think it's a gift that we always have from God. We just have to reach for it. But I think it's interesting that hope perches in our soul. It doesn't nest in our soul. It's not settled in. And I think that it's so easy for hope to fly away, for it just to disappear. And we have to constantly remind ourselves that God is with us and our hope comes from Him. And I got the answer to my prayer. I have a simpler life, and my husband is the spiritual head of our household. From Psalm 62, "Find rest, O my soul, in God alone. My hope comes from Him. He alone is my rock and my salvation. He is my fortress. I will not be shaken." Thank you.